The Illustrated Key to the Tarot, The Veil of Divination. By L. W. de Laurence. 1918. Part 1. Preface, and the Veil and its Symbols. Preface. It seems rather of necessity than predilection in the sense of apologia that I should put on record in the first place a plain statement of my personal position, as one who for many years of literary life has been, subject to his spiritual and other limitations, an exponent of the higher mystic schools. It will be thought that I am acting strangely in concerning myself at this day with what appears at first sight in simply a well-known method of fortune-telling. Now, the opinions of some, even in the literary reviews, are of no importance unless they happen to agree with our own, but in order to sanctify this doctrine we must take care that our opinions, and the subjects out of which they arise, are concerned only with the highest. Yet it is just this which may seem doubtful, in the present instance, not only to those, whom I respect within the proper measures of detachment, but to some of more real consequence, seeing that their dedications are mine. To these and to any I would say that after the most illuminated Frater Christian Rosy Cross had beheld the chemical marriage in the secret palace of transmutation, his story breaks off abruptly, with an intimation that he expected next morning to be doorkeeper. After the same manner, it happens more often than might seem likely that those who have seen the occult powers of nature through the most clearest veils of the sacraments are those who assume thereafter the humblest offices of all about the house of wisdom. By such simple devices also are the adepts and great masters in the secret orders distinguished from the cohort of neophytes as servi servorum mysterii. So also, or in a way which is not entirely unlike, we meet with the tarot cards at the outermost gates amidst the fritterings and debris of the so-called occult arts, about which no one in their senses has suffered the smallest deception, and yet these cards belong in themselves to another region, for they contain a very high symbolism, which is interpreted according to the laws of grace rather than by the pretexts and intuitions of that which passes for divination. The fact that the wisdom of God, nature, is foolishness with men does not create a presumption that the foolishness of this world makes in any sense for divine wisdom. So neither the scholars in the ordinary classes nor the pedagogues in the seats of the mighty will be quick to perceive the likelihood or even the possibility of this proposition. The subject has been in the hands of cartomancists as part of the stock in trade of their industry. I do not seek to persuade any one outside my own circles that this is of much or of no consequence, but on the historical and interpretative sides it has not fared better. It has been there in the hands of exponents who have brought it into utter contempt for those people who possess philosophical insight or faculties for the appreciation of evidence. It is time that it should be rescued, and this I propose to undertake once and for all, that I may have done with the side issues which distract from the term. As poetry is the most beautiful expression of the things that are of all most beautiful, so is symbolism the most Catholic expression in concealment of things that are most profound in the sanctuary and that have not been declared outside it with the same fullness by means of the spoken word. The justification of the rule of silence is no part of my present concern. But I have put on record elsewhere, and quite recently, what it is possible to say on this subject. The little treatise which follows is divided into 3 parts, in the first of which I have dealt with the antiquities of the subject and a few things that arise from and connect therewith. It should be understood that it is not put forward as a contribution to the history of playing cards, about which I know and care nothing. It is a consideration dedicated and addressed to a certain school of occultism, more especially in France, as to the source and center of all the phantasmagoria which has entered into expression during the last 50 years under the pretense of considering tarot cards historically. In the second part, I have dealt with the symbolism according to some of its higher aspects, and this also serves to introduce the complete and rectified tarot, which is available separately, in the form of colored cards, the designs of which are added to the present text in black and white. They have been prepared under my supervision in respect of the attributions and meanings by a lady who has high claims as an artist. Regarding the divinatory part, by which my thesis is terminated, I consider it personally as a fact in the history of the tarot. As such, I have drawn, from all published sources, a harmony of the meanings which have been attached to the various cards, and I have given prominence to one method of working that has not been published previously, having the merit of simplicity, while it is also of universal application. It may be held to replace the cumbrous and involved systems of the larger handbooks. Part 1. Section 1. The Veil and its Symbols Introductory and General. The pathology of the poet says that the undevout astronomer is mad, the pathology of the very plain man says that the genius is mad, and between these extremes, which stand for 10,000 analogous excesses, the sovereign reason takes the part of a moderator and does what it can. I do not think that there is a pathology of the occult dedications, but about their extravagances no one can question, and it is not less difficult than thankless to act as a moderator regarding them. Moreover, the pathology, if it existed, would probably be an empiricism rather than a diagnosis, and would offer no criterion. Now, occultism is not like mystic faculty, and it very seldom works in harmony either with business aptitude in the things of ordinary life or with a knowledge of the canons of evidence in its own sphere. I know that for the high art of ribaldry there are few things more dull than the criticism which maintains that a thesis is untrue, and cannot understand that it is decorative. I know also that after long dealing with doubtful doctrine or with difficult research it is always refreshing, in the domain of this art, to meet with what is obviously a fraud or at least of complete unreason. But the aspects of history, as seen through the lens of occultism, are not as a rule decorative, and have few gifts of refreshment to heal the lacerations which they inflict on the logical understanding. It almost requires a frater sapiens dominabitur astris in the fellowship of the Rosy Cross to have the patience which is not lost amidst clouds of folly when the consideration of the tarot is undertaken in accordance with the higher law of symbolism. The true tarot is symbolism, it speaks no other language and offers no other signs. Given the inward meaning of its emblems, they do become a kind of alphabet which is capable of indefinite combinations and makes true sense in all. On the highest plane it offers a key to the mysteries, in a manner which is not arbitrary and has not been read in. But the wrong symbolical stories have been told concerning it, and the wrong history has been given in every published work which so far has dealt with the subject. It has been intimated by 2 or 3 writers that, at least in respect of the meanings, this is unavoidably the case, because few are acquainted with them, while these few hold by transmission under pledges and cannot betray their trust. The suggestion is fantastic on the surface, for there seems a certain anticlimax in the proposition that a particular interpretation of fortune-telling l'art de tirer les cartes can be reserved for sons of the doctrine. The fact remains, notwithstanding, that a secret tradition exists regarding the tarot, and as there is always the possibility that some minor arcana of the mysteries may be made public with a flourish of trumpets, it will be as well to go before the event and to warn those who are curious in such matters that any revelation will contain only a third part of the earth and sea and a third part of the stars of heaven in respect of the symbolism. This is for the simple reason that neither in root matter nor in development has more been put into writing. So that much will remain to be said after any pretended unveiling. The guardians of certain temples of initiation who keep watch over mysteries of this order have therefore no cause for alarm. In my preface to the Tarot of the Bohemians, which, rather by an accident of things, has recently come to be reissued after a long period, I have said what was then possible or seemed most necessary. The present work is designed more especially as I have intimated to introduce a rectified set of the cards themselves and to tell the unadorned truth concerning them, so far as this is possible in the outer circles. As regards the sequence of greater symbols, their ultimate and highest meaning lies deeper than the common language of picture or hieroglyph. This will be understood by those who have received some part of the secret tradition. As regards the verbal meanings allocated here to the more important trump cards, they are designed to set aside the follies and impostures of past attributions, to put those who have the gift of insight on the right track, and to take care, within the limits of my possibilities, that they are the truth so far as they go. It is regrettable in several respects that I must confess to certain reservations, but there is a question of honor at issue. Furthermore, between the follies on the one side of those who know nothing of the tradition, yet are in their own opinion the exponents of something called occult science and philosophy, and on the other side between the make-believe of a few writers who have received part of the tradition and think that it constitutes a legal title to scatter dust in the eyes of the world without, I feel that the time has come to say what it is possible to say, so that the effect of current charlatanism and unintelligence may be reduced to a minimum. We shall see in due course that the history of tarot cards is largely of the negative kind. And that, when the issues are cleared by the dissipation of reveries and gratuitous speculations expressed in the terms of certitude, there is in fact no history prior to the 14th century. The deception and self-deception regarding their origin in Egypt, India or China put a lying spirit into the mouths of the first expositors, and the later occult writers have done little more than reproduce the first false testimony in the good faith of an intelligence unawakened to the issues of research. As it so happens, all expositions have worked within a very narrow range, and comparatively speaking, little to the inventive faculty. One brilliant opportunity has at least been missed, for it has not so far occurred to anyone that the tarot might perhaps have done duty and even originated as a secret symbolical language of the Albigensian sects. I commend this suggestion to the lineal descendants in the spirit of Gabriele Rossetti and Eugene Aroux, to Mr. Harold Bailey as another new light on the Renaissance, and as a taper at least in the darkness which, with great respect, might be serviceable to the zealous and all-searching mind of Mrs. Cooper Oakley. Think only what the supposed testimony of watermarks on paper might gain from the tarot card of the Pope or Hierophant, in connection with the notion of a secret Albigensian patriarch, of which Mr. Bailey has found in these same watermarks so much material to his purpose. Think only for a moment about the card of the High Priestess as representing the Albigensian Church itself, and think of the tower struck by lightning as typifying the desired destruction of Papal Rome, the city on the 7 hills, with the pontiff and his temporal power cast down from the spiritual edifice when it is riven by the wrath of God, nature. The possibilities are so numerous and persuasive that they almost deceive in their expression one of the elect who has invented them. But there is more even than this, though I scarcely dare to cite it. When the time came for the tarot cards to be the subject of their first formal explanation, the archaeologist Court de Gebelin reproduced some of their most important emblems, and if I may so term it, the codex which he used has served by means of his engraved plates as a basis of reference for many sets that have been issued subsequently. The figures are very primitive and differ as such from the cards of Attila, the Marseilles Tarot, and others still current in France. I am not a good judge in such matters, but the fact that every one of the trumps major might have answered for watermark purposes is shown by the cases which I have quoted and by one most remarkable example of the Ace of Cups. I should call it an Eucharistic emblem after the manner of a ciborium, but this does not signify at the moment. The point is that Mr. Harold Bailey gives 6 analogous devices in his new light on the Renaissance, being watermarks on paper of the 17th century, which he claims to be of Albigensian origin and to represent sacramental and Graal emblems. Had he only heard of the tarot, had he known that these cards of divination, cards of fortune, cards of all vagrant arts, were perhaps current at the period in the south of France, I think that his enchanting but all too fantastic hypothesis might have dilated still more largely in the atmosphere of his dream. We should no doubt have had a vision of Christian Gnosticism, Manichaeanism, and all that he understands by pure primitive gospel, shining behind the pictures. I do not look through such glasses, and I can only commend the subject to his attention at a later period. It is mentioned here that I may introduce with an unheard of wonder the marvels of arbitrary speculation as to the history of the cards. With reference to their form and number, it should scarcely be necessary to enumerate them, for they must be almost commonly familiar, but as it is precarious to assume anything, and as there are also other reasons, I will tabulate them briefly as follows. Part 1 Section 2, Trumps Major, otherwise, Greater Arcana. 1. The magus, magician, or juggler, the caster of the dice and mountebank, in the world of vulgar trickery. This is the colportage interpretation, and it has the same correspondence with the real symbolical meaning that the use of the tarot in fortune-telling has with its mystic construction according to the secret science of symbolism. I should add that many independent students of the subject, following their own lights, have produced individual sequences of meaning in respect of the trumps major, and their lights are sometimes suggestive, but they are not the true lights. For example, Eliphas Levi says that the magus signifies that unity which is the mother of numbers, others say that it is the divine unity, and one of the latest French commentators considers that in its general sense it is the will. 2. The High Priestess, the Pope Joan, or female pontiff. Early expositors have sought to term this card the Mother, or Pope's wife, which is opposed to the symbolism. It is sometimes held to represent the divine law and the gnosis, in which case the priestess corresponds to the idea of the Shekinah. She is the secret tradition and the higher sense of the instituted mysteries. 3. The Empress, who is sometimes represented with full face, while her correspondence, the Emperor, is in profile. As there has been some tendency to ascribe a symbolical significance to this distinction, it seems desirable to say that it carries no inner meaning. The Empress has been connected with the ideas of universal fecundity and in a general sense with activity. 4. The Emperor, by imputation the spouse of the former. He is occasionally represented as wearing, in addition to his personal insignia, the stars or ribbons of some order of chivalry. I mention this to show that the cards are a medley of old and new emblems. Those who insist upon the evidence of the one may deal, if they can, with the other. No effectual argument for the antiquity of a particular design can be drawn from the fact that it incorporates old material, but there is also none which can be based on sporadic novelties, the intervention of which may signify only the unintelligent hand of an editor or of a late draftsman. 5. The High Priest or Hierophant, called also Spiritual Father, and more commonly in obviously the Pope. It seems even to have been named the Abbot, and then its correspondence, the High Priestess, was the Abbess or Mother of the convent. Both are arbitrary names. The insignia of the figures are papal, and in such case the High Priestess is and can be only the Church, to whom Pope and priests are married by the spiritual rite of ordination. I think, however, that in its primitive form this card did not represent the Roman pontiff. 6. The Lovers or Marriage. This symbol has undergone many variations, as might be expected from its subject. In the 18th century form, by which it first became known to the world of archaeological research, it is really a card of married life. Showing father and mother, with their child placed between them, and the pagan Cupid above, in the act of flying his shaft, is, of course, a misapplied emblem. The Cupid is of love beginning rather than of love in its fullness, guarding the fruit thereof. The card is said to have been entitled Simulacrum Fidei, the symbol of conjugal faith, for which the rainbow as a sign of the covenant would have been a more appropriate concomitant. The figures are also held to have signified truth, honor and love, but I suspect that this was, so to speak, the gloss of a commentator moralizing. It has these, but it has other and higher aspects. 7. The Chariot. This is represented in some extant codices as being drawn by two sphinxes, and the device is in consonance with the symbolism, but it must not be supposed that such was its original form. The variation was invented to support a particular historical hypothesis. In the 18th century white horses were yoked to the car. As regards its usual name, the lesser stands for the greater. It is really the king in his triumph, typifying, however, the victory which creates kingship as its natural consequence and not the vested royalty of the fourth card. Court de Gebelin said that it was Osiris triumphing, the conquering sun in springtime having vanquished the obstacles of winter. We know now that Osiris rising from the dead is not represented by such obvious symbolism. Other animals than horses have also been used to draw the currus triumphalis, as, for example, a lion and a leopard. 8. Fortitude. This is one of the cardinal virtues, of which I shall speak later. The female figure is usually represented as closing the mouth of a lion. In the earlier form which is printed by Court de Gebelin, she is obviously opening it. The first alternative is better symbolically, but either is an instance of strength in its conventional understanding, and conveys the idea of mastery. It has been said that the figure represents organic force, moral force, and the principle of all force. 9. The Hermit, as he is termed in common parlance, stands next on the list. He is also the Capuchin, and in more philosophical language the sage. He is said to be in search of that truth which is located far off in the sequence, and of justice which has preceded him on the way. But this is a card of attainment, as we shall see later, rather than a card of quest. It is said also that his lantern contains the light of occult science and that his staff is a magic wand. These interpretations are comparable in every respect to the divinatory and fortune-telling meanings with which I shall have to deal in their turn. The diabolism of both is that they are true after their own manner, but that they miss all the high things to which the greater arcana should be allocated. It is as if a man who knows in his heart that all roads lead to the heights, and that God, nature, is at the great height of all, should choose the way of perdition or the way of folly as the path of his own attainment. Eliphaz Levi has allocated this card to prudence, but in so doing he has been actuated by the wish to fill a gap which would otherwise occur in the symbolism. The four cardinal virtues are necessary to an ideological sequence like the trumps major, but they must not be taken only in that first sense which exists for the use and consolation of him who in these days of halfpenny journalism is called the man in the street. In their proper understanding they are the correlatives of the counsels of perfection when these have been similarly re-expressed, and they read as follows: a. Transcendental justice, the counter-equilibrium of the scales, when they have been overweighted so that they dip heavily on the side of God, nature. The corresponding counsel is to use loaded dice when you play for high stakes with Diabolus. The axiom is aut deus, aut nihil. b. Divine ecstasy, as a counterpoise to something called temperance, the sign of which is, I believe, the extinction of lights in the tavern. The corresponding counsel is to drink only of new wine in the kingdom of the Father, because God, nature, is all in all. The axiom is that man being a reasonable being must get intoxicated with God, nature, the imputed case in point is Spinoza. c. The state of royal fortitude, which is the state of a tower of ivory and a house of gold, but it is God, nature, and not the man who has become turris fortitudinis a facie inimici, and out of that house the enemy has been cast. The corresponding counsel is that a man must not spare himself even in the presence of death, but he must be certain that his sacrifice shall be of any open course the best that will ensure his end. The axiom is that the strength which is raised to such a degree that a man dares lose himself shall show him how nature, God, is found. And as to such refuge dare therefore and learn. d. Prudence is the economy which follows the line of least resistance, that the soul may get back whence it came. It is a doctrine of divine parsimony and conservation of energy because of the stress, the terror and the manifest impertinences of this life. The corresponding counsel is that true prudence is concerned with the one thing needful, and the axiom is, waste not, want not. The conclusion of the whole matter is a business proposition founded on the law of exchange. You cannot help getting what you seek in respect of the things that are divine, it is the law of supply and demand. I have mentioned these few matters at this point for two simple reasons: a. Because in proportion to the impartiality of the mind it seems sometimes more difficult to determine whether it is vice or vulgarity which lays waste the present world more piteously. b. Because in order to remedy the imperfections of the old notions it is highly needful, on occasion, to empty terms and phrases of their accepted significance, that they may receive a new and more adequate meaning. 10. The Wheel of Fortune. There is a current manual of cartomancy which has obtained a considerable vogue in England, and amidst a great scattermeal of curious things to no purpose has intersected a few serious subjects. In its last and largest edition it treats in one section of the tarot, which if I interpret the author rightly it regards from beginning to end as the Wheel of Fortune, this expression being understood in my own sense. I have no objection to such an inclusive though conventional description. It obtains in all the worlds, and I wonder that it has not been adopted previously as the most appropriate name on the side of common fortune-telling. It is also the title of one of the trumps major that indeed of our concern at the moment, as my subtitle shows. Of recent years this has suffered many fantastic presentations and one hypothetical reconstruction which is suggestive in its symbolism. The wheel has 7 radii. In the 18th century the ascending and descending animals were really of nondescript character, one of them having a human head. At the summit was another monster with the body of an indeterminate beast, wings on shoulders and a crown on head. It carried 2 wands in its claws. These are replaced in the reconstruction by a Hermanubis rising with the wheel, a sphinx couchant at the summit and a typhon on the descending side. Here is another instance of an invention in support of a hypothesis, but if the latter be set aside the grouping is symbolically correct and can pass as such. 11. Justice. That the tarot, though it is of all reasonable antiquity, is not of time immemorial, is shown by this card, which could have been presented in a much more archaic manner. Those, however, who have gifts of discernment in matters of this kind will not need to be told that age is in no sense of the essence of the consideration. The right of closing the lodge in the third craft grade of masonry may belong to the late 18th century, but the fact signifies nothing, it is still the summary of all the instituted and official mysteries. The female figure of the 11th card is said to be Astrea, who personified the same virtue and is represented by the same symbols. This goddess notwithstanding, and notwithstanding the Vulgarian Cupid, the tarot is not of Roman mythology, or of Greek either. Its presentation of justice is supposed to be one of the 4 cardinal virtues included in the sequence of greater arcana, but, as it so happens, 4th emblem is wanting, and it became necessary for the commentators to discover it at all costs. They did what it was possible to do, and yet the laws of research have never succeeded in extricating the missing Persephone under the form of prudence. Court de Gebelin attempted to solve the difficulty by a tour de force, and believed that he had extracted what he wanted from the symbol of the hanged man, wherein he deceived himself. The tarot has, therefore, its justice, its temperance also and its fortitude, but owing to a curious omission it does not offer us any type of prudence, though it may be admitted that, in some respects, the isolation of the hermit, pursuing a solitary path by the light of his own lamp, gives, to those who can receive it, a certain high counsel in respect of the via prudentiae. 12. The hanged man. This is the symbol which is supposed to represent prudence, and Eliphas Levi says, in his most shallow and plausible manner, that it is the adept bound by his engagements. The figure of a man is suspended head downwards from a gibbet, to which he is attached by a rope about one of his ankles. The arms are bound behind him and one leg is crossed over the other. According to another, and indeed the prevailing interpretation, he signifies sacrifice, but all current meanings attributed to this card are cartomancists' intuitions, apart from any real value, on the symbolical side. The fortune-tellers of the 18th century who circulated tarots depict a semi-feminine youth in jerkin, poised erect on one foot and loosely attached to a short stake driven into the ground. 13. Death. The method of presentation is almost invariable, and embodies a bourgeois form of symbolism. The scene is the field of life, and amidst ordinary rank vegetation there are living arms and heads protruding from the ground. One of the heads is crowned, and a skeleton with a great scythe is in the act of mowing it. The transparent and unescapable meaning is death. But the alternatives allocated to the symbol are change and transformation. Other heads have been swept from their place previously, but it is, in its current and patent meaning, more especially a card of the death of kings. In the exotic sense it has been said to signify the ascent of the spirit in the divine spheres, creation and destruction, perpetual movement, and so forth. 14. Temperance. The winged figure of a female who, in opposition to all doctrine concerning the hierarchy of angels, is usually allocated to this order of ministering spirits is pouring liquid from one pitcher to another. In his last work on the tarot, Dr. Pappus abandons the traditional form and depicts a woman wearing an Egyptian headdress. The first thing which seems clear on the surface is that the entire symbol has no especial connection with temperance, and the fact that this designation has always obtained for the card offers a very obvious instance of a meaning behind meaning, which is the title in chief to consideration in respect of the tarot as a whole. 15. The Devil. In the 18th century this card seems to have been rather a symbol of merely animal impudicity. Except for a fantastic headdress, the chief figure is entirely naked, it has bat-like wings, and the hands and feet are represented by the claws of a bird. In the right hand there is a scepter terminating in a sign which has been thought to represent fire. The figure as a whole is not particularly evil, It has no tail, and the commentators who have said that the claws are those of a harpy have spoken at random. There is no better ground for the alternative suggestion that they are eagle's claws. Attached, by a cord depending from their collars, to the pedestal on which the figure is mounted, are two small demons, presumably male and female. These are tailed but not winged. Since 1856 the influence of Eliphas Levi and his doctrine of occultism has changed the face of this card, and it now appears as a pseudo-Baphometic figure with the head of a goat and a great torch between the horns. It is seated instead of erect, and in place of the generative organs there is the hermetic caduceus. In Le Tarot Divinatoire of Papoose the small demons are replaced by naked human beings, male and female, who are yoked only to each other. The author may be felicitated on this improved symbolism. 16. The Tower Struck by Lightning. Its alternative titles are, Castle of Plutus, Gods, Nature's, House and the Tower of Babel. In the last case, the figures falling therefrom are held to be Nimrod and his minister. It is assuredly a card of confusion, and the design corresponds, broadly speaking, to any of the designations except Maison Dieu, unless we are to understand that the house of God, nature, has been abandoned in the veil of the temple rent. It is a little surprising that the device has not so far been allocated to the destruction of Solomon's temple, when the lightning would symbolize the fire and sword with which that edifice was visited by the king of the Chaldees. 17. The star, dog star, or Sirius, also called fantastically the Star of the Magi. Grouped about it are 7 minor luminaries, and beneath it is a naked female figure, with her left knee upon the earth and her right foot upon the water. She is in the act of pouring fluids from 2 vessels. A bird is perched on a tree near her, for this a butterfly on a rose has been substituted in some later cards. So also the star has been called that of hope. This is one of the cards which Court de Gebelin describes as wholly Egyptian, that is to say, in his own reverie. 18. The Moon. Some 18th century cards show the luminary on its waning side. In the debased edition of Attila, it is the moon at night in her plenitude, set in a heaven of stars. Of recent years the moon is shown on the side of her increase. In nearly all presentations she is shining brightly and shedding the moisture of fertilizing dew in great drops. Beneath there are 2 towers, between which a path winds to the verge of the horizon. 2 dogs, or alternatively a wolf and dog, are baying at the moon, and in the foreground there is water, through which a crayfish moves towards the land. 19. The Sun. The luminary is distinguished in older cards by chief rays that are waved and salient alternately and by secondary salient rays. It appears to shed its influence on Earth not only by light and heat, but like the moon by drops of dew. Court de Gebelin termed these tears of gold and of pearl just as he identified the lunar dew with the tears of Isis. Beneath the dog star there is a wall suggesting an enclosure, as it might be, a walled garden wherein are 2 children, either naked or lightly clothed, facing a water, and gambling, or running hand in hand. Eliphas Levi says that these are sometimes replaced by a spinner unwinding destinies, and otherwise by a much better symbol, a naked child mounted on a white horse and displaying a scarlet standard. 20. The Last Judgment. I have spoken of this symbol already, the form of which is essentially invariable, even in the Attila set. An angel sounds his trumpet per sepulchra regionum, and the dead arise. It matters little that Attila omits the angel, or that Dr. Papoose substitutes a ridiculous figure, which is, however, in consonance with the general motive of that tarot set which accompanies his latest work. Before rejecting the transparent interpretation of the symbolism which is conveyed by the name of the card and by the picture which it presents to the eye, we should feel very sure of our ground. On the surface, at least, it is and can be only the resurrection of that triad father, mother, child whom we have met with already in the 8th card. M. Bourget hazards the suggestion that esoterically it is the symbol of evolution of which it carries none of the signs. Others say that it signifies renewal, which is obvious enough, that it is the triad of human life, that it is the generative force of the earth, and eternal life. Court de Gebelin makes himself impossible as usual, and points out that if the gravestones were removed it could be accepted as a symbol of creation. 21 which, however, in most of the arrangements is the cipher card, number nothing the fool, mate, or unwise man. Court de Gebelin places it at the head of the whole series as the 0 or negative which is presupposed by numeration, and as this is a simpler so also it is a better arrangement. It has been abandoned because in later times the cards have been attributed to the letters of the Hebrew alphabet, and there has been apparently some difficulty about allocating the 0 symbol satisfactorily in a sequence of letters all of which signify numbers. In the present reference of the card to the letter Shin, which corresponds to 200, the difficulty or the unreason remains. The truth is that the real arrangement of the cards has never transpired. The fool carries a wallet. He is looking over his shoulder and does not know that he is on the brink of a precipice, but a dog or other animal, some call it a tiger, is attacking him from behind, and he is hurried to his destruction unawares. Attila has given a justifiable variation of this card as generally understood in the form of a court jester, with cap, bells and motley garb. The other descriptions say that the wallet contains the bearer's follies and vices, which seems bourgeois and arbitrary. 22. The world, the universe, or time. The four living creatures of the Apocalypse and Ezekiel's vision, attributed to the evangelists in Christian symbolism, are grouped about an elliptic garland, as if it were a chain of flowers intended to symbolize all sensible things. Within this garland there is the figure of a woman, whom the wind has girt about the loins with a light scarf. And this is all her vesture. She is in the act of dancing, and has a wand in either hand. It is eloquent as an image of the swirl of the sensitive life, of joy attained in the body, of the soul's intoxication in the earthly paradise, but still guarded by the divine watchers, as if by the powers and the graces of the holy name, Tetragrammaton, those four ineffable letters which are sometimes attributed to the mystical beasts. Eliphaz Levi calls the garland a crown, and reports that the figure represents truth. Dr. Pappus connects it with the absolute and the realization of the great work. For yet others it is a symbol of humanity and the eternal reward of a life that has been spent well. It should be noted that in the four quarters of the garland there are four flowers distinctively marked. According to P. Christian, the garland should be formed of roses, and this is the kind of chain which Eliphaz Levi says is less easily broken than a chain of iron. Perhaps by antithesis, but for the same reason, the iron crown of Peter may lie more lightly on the heads of sovereign pontiffs than the crown of gold on kings. Part 1. Section 3. The Four Suits. Otherwise, Lesser Arcana. The resources of interpretation have been lavished, if not exhausted, on the 22 trumps major, the symbolism of which is unquestionable. There remain the four suits, being wands or scepters ex hypothesi, in the archaeology of the subject, the antecedents of diamonds in modern cards, cups, corresponding to hearts, swords, which answer to clubs, as the weapon of chivalry is in relation to the peasant's quarterstaff or the Alsatian bludgeon, and, finally, pentacles called also deniers and money, which are the prototypes of spades. In the old as in the new suits, there are 10 numbered cards, but in the tarot there are 4 court cards allocated to each suit, or a knight in addition to king, queen and knave. The knave is a page, valet, or damoiseau. Most correctly, he is an esquire. Presumably in the service of the knight, but there are certain rare sets in which the page becomes a maid of honor, thus pairing the sexes in the tetrad of the court cards. There are naturally distinctive features in respect of the several pictures, by which I mean that the King of Wands is not exactly the same personage as the King of Cups, even after allowance has been made for the different emblems that they bear, but the symbolism resides in their rank and in the suit to which they belong. So also the smaller cards, which until now have never been issued pictorially in these our modern days, depend on the particular meaning attaching to their numbers in connection with the particular suit. I reserve, therefore, the details of the lesser arcana, till I come to speak in the second part of the rectified and perfected tarot which accompanies this work. The consensus of divinatory meanings attached both to the greater and lesser symbols belongs to the third part. Part 1. Section 4. The Tarot in History. Our immediate next concern is to speak of the cards in their history, so that the speculations and reveries, which have been perpetuated and multiplied in the schools of occult research may be disposed of once and for all. As intimated in the preface hereto, let it be understood at the beginning of this point that there are several sets or sequences of ancient cards which are only in part of our concern. The Tarot of the Bohemians, by Papus, which I have recently carried through the press, revising the imperfect rendering, has some useful information in this connection, and, except for the omission of dates and other evidences of the archaeological sense, it will serve the purpose of the general reader. I do not propose to extend it in the present place in any manner that can be called considerable, but certain additions are desirable, and so also is a distinct mode of presentation. Among ancient cards which are mentioned in connection with the tarot, there are firstly those of Baldini, which are the celebrated set attributed by tradition to Andrea Mantegna, though this view is now generally rejected. Their date is supposed to be about 1470, and it is thought that there are not more than 4 collections extant in Europe. A copy or reproduction referred to 1485 is perhaps equally rare. A complete set contains 50 numbers, divided into 5 denaries or sequences of 10 cards each. There seems to be no record that they were used for the purposes of a game, whether of chance or skill. They could scarcely have lent themselves to divination or any form of fortune-telling, while it would be more than idle to impute a profound symbolical meaning to their obvious emblematic designs. The first denary embodies conditions of life, as follows: 1. The beggar, 2. The knave, 3. The artisan, 4. The merchant, 5. The noble, 6. The knight, 7. The doge, 8. The king, 9. The emperor, 10. The pope. The second contains the muses and their divine leader, 11. Calliope, 12. Urania, 13. Terpsichore, 14. Erato, 15. Polyhymnia, 16. Talia, 17. Melpomene, 18. Euterpe, 19. Clio, 20. Apollo. The third combines part of the liberal arts and sciences with other departments of human learning. As follows: 21. Grammar, 22. Logic, 23. Rhetoric, 24. Geometry, 25. Arithmetic, 26. Music, 27. Poetry, 28. Philosophy, 29. Astrology, 30. Theology. The fourth denary completes the liberal arts and enumerates the virtues: 31. Astronomy, 32. Chronology, 33. Cosmology, 34. Temperance, 35. Prudence, 36. Strength, 37. Justice, 38. Charity, 39. Hope, 40. Faith. The fifth and last denary presents the system of the heavens: 41. Moon, 42. Mercury, 43. Venus, 44. Sun, 45. Mars. 46. Jupiter, 47. Saturn, 48. Eighth sphere, 49. Prima mobile, 50. First cause. We must set aside the fantastic attempts to extract complete tarot sequences out of these denaries. We must forbear from saying, for example, that the conditions of life correspond to the trumps major, the muses to pentacles, the arts and sciences to cups, the virtues, etc., to scepters, and the conditions of life to swords. This kind of thing can be done by a process of mental contortion, but it has no place in reality. At the same time, it is hardly possible that individual cards should not exhibit certain, and even striking, analogies. The Baldini king, knight and knave suggest the corresponding court cards of the minor arcana. The emperor, pope, temperance, strength, justice, moon and sun are common to the Mantegna and trumps major of any tarot pack. Predisposition has also connected the beggar and fool, Venus and the star, Mars and the chariot, Saturn and the hermit, even Jupiter, or alternatively the first cause, with the tarot card of the world. 1. But the most salient features of the trumps major are wanting in the Mantegna set. And I do not believe that the ordered sequence in the latter case gave birth, as it has been suggested, to the others. Romain Merlin maintained this view, and positively assigned the Baldini cards to the end of the 14th century. If it be agreed that, except accidentally and sporadically, the Baldini emblematic or allegorical pictures have only a shadowy and occasional connection with tarot cards, and, whatever their most probable date, that they can have supplied no originating motive. It follows that we are still seeking not only an origin in place and time for the symbols with which we are concerned, but a specific case of their manifestation on the continent of Europe to serve as a point of departure, whether backward or forward. Now it is well known that in the year 1393 the painter Charles Gringaner, who for no reason that I can trace has been termed an occultist and Kabbalist by one indifferent English writer, designed and illuminated some kind of cards for the diversion of Charles VI of France when he was in mental ill health, and the question arises whether anything can be ascertained of their nature. The only available answer is that at Paris, in the Bibliothèque du Roi, there are 17 cards drawn and illuminated on paper. They are very beautiful, antique and priceless. The figures have a background of gold, and are framed in a silver border, but they are accompanied by no inscription and no number. It is certain, however, that they include tarot trumps major, the list of which is as follows: Fool, Emperor, Pope, Lovers, Wheel of Fortune, Temperance, Fortitude, Justice, Moon, Sun, Chariot, Hermit, Hanged Man, Death, Tower and Last Judgment. There are also 4 tarot cards at the Musée Cara, Venice, and 5 others elsewhere, making 9 in all. They include 2 pages or knaves, 3 kings and 2 queens, thus illustrating the minor arcana. These collections have all been identified with the set produced by Gringaner, but the ascription was disputed so far back as the year 1848, and it is not apparently put forward at the present day, even by those who are anxious to make evident the antiquity of the tarot. It is held that they are all of Italian and some at least certainly of Venetian origin. We have in this manner our requisite point of departure in respect of place at least. It has further been stated with authority that Venetian tarots are the old and true form, which is the parent of all others, but I infer that complete sets of the major and minor arcana belong to much later periods. The pack is thought to have consisted of 78 cards. Notwithstanding, however, the preference shown towards the Venetian tarot, it is acknowledged that some portions of a Minciate or Florentine set must be allocated to the period between 1413 and 1418. These were once in the possession of Countess Gonzaga, at Milan. A complete Minciate pack contained 97 cards, and in spite of these vestiges it is regarded, speaking generally, as a later development. There were 41 trumps major, the additional numbers being borrowed or reflected from the Baldini emblematic set. In the court cards of the minor arcana, the knights were monsters of the centaur type, while the knaves were sometimes warriors and sometimes serving men. Another distinction dwelt upon is the prevalence of Christian medieval ideas and the utter absence of any Oriental suggestion. The question, however, remains whether there are Eastern traces in any tarot cards. We come, in fine, to the Bolognese tarot, sometimes referred to as that of Venice and having the trumps major complete, but numbers 20 and 21 are transposed. In the minor arcana the 2, 3, 4 and 5 of the small cards are omitted, with the result that there are 62 cards in all. The termination of the trumps major in the representation of the Last Judgment is curious, and a little arresting as a point of symbolism, but this is all that it seems necessary to remark about the pack of Bologna, except that it is said to have been invented or, as a tarot, more correctly, modified about the beginning of the 15th century by an exiled prince of Pisa resident in the city. The purpose for which they were used is made tolerably evident by the fact that, in 1423, Saint Bernardine of Siena preached against playing cards and other forms of gambling. 40 years later the importation of cards into England was forbidden, the time being that of King Edward IV. This is the first certain record of the subject in our country. It is difficult to consult perfect examples of the sets enumerated above, but it is not difficult to meet with detailed and illustrated descriptions, I should add, provided always that the writer is not an occultist, for accounts emanating from that source are usually imperfect, vague and preoccupied by considerations which cloud the critical issues. An instance in point is offered by certain views which have been expressed on the Montaigne Codex, if I may continue to dignify card sequences with a title of this kind. It has been ruled, as we have seen in occult reverie, that Apollo and the 9 muses are in correspondence with pentacles, but the analogy does not obtain in a working state of research, and reverie must border on nightmare before we can identify astronomy, chronology and cosmology with the suit of cups. The Baldini figures which represent these subjects are emblems of their period and not symbols, like the tarot. In conclusion as to this part, I observe that there has been a disposition among experts to think that the trumps major were not originally connected with the numbered suits. I do not wish to offer a personal view. I am not an expert in the history of games of chance, and I hate the profanum vulgus of divinatory devices, but I venture, under all reserves, to intimate that if later research should justify such a leaning, then except for the good old art of fortune-telling and its tamperings with so-called destiny it will be so much the better for the greater arcana. So far as regards what is indispensable as preliminaries to the historical aspects of tarot cards. And I will now take up the speculative side of the subject and produce its test of value. In my preface to the Tarot of the Bohemians I have mentioned that the first writer who made known the fact of the cards was the archaeologist Court de Gebelin, who, just prior to the French Revolution, occupied several years in the publication of his Monde Primitif, which extended to 9 quarto volumes. He was a learned man of his epoch, a high-grade Mason, a member of the Historical Lodge of the Philhellenes, and a virtuoso with a profound and lifelong interest in the debate on universal antiquities before a science of the subject existed. Even at this day, his memorials and dissertations, collected under the title which I have quoted, are worth possessing. By an accident of things, he became acquainted with the tarot when it was quite unknown in Paris, and at once conceived that it was the remnants of an Egyptian book. He made inquiries concerning it and ascertained that it was in circulation over a considerable part of Europe, Spain, Italy, Germany and the south of France. It was in use as a game of chance or skill, after the ordinary manner of playing cards. And he ascertained further how the game was played. But it was in use also for the higher purpose of divination or fortune-telling, and with the help of a learned friend he discovered the significance attributed to the cards, together with the method of arrangement adopted for this purpose. In a word, he made a distinct contribution to our knowledge, and he is still a source of reference, but it is on the question of fact only, and not on the beloved hypothesis that the tarot contains pure Egyptian doctrine. However, he set the opinion which is prevalent to this day throughout the occult schools that in the mystery and wonder, the strange night of the gods, the unknown tongue and the undeciphered hieroglyphics which symbolized Egypt at the end of the 18th century, the origin of the cards was lost. So dreamed one of the characteristic literati of France, and one can almost understand and sympathize, for the country about the Delta and the Nile was beginning to loom largely in the preoccupation of learned thought, and omni ignotum pro Egyptiaco was the way the delusion to which many minds tended. It was excusable enough then, but that the madness was continued and, within the charmed circle of the occult sciences, still passes from mouth to mouth, there is no excuse for this. Let us see. Therefore, the evidence produced by M. Court de Gebelin in support of his thesis, and, that I may deal justly, it shall be summarized as far as possible in his own words. 1. The figures and arrangement of the game are manifestly allegorical. 2. The allegories are in conformity with the civil, philosophical and religious doctrine of ancient Egypt. 3. If the cards were modern, no high priestess would be included among the greater arcana, for the figure in question bears the horns of Isis. 5. The card which is called the Emperor has a scepter terminating in a triple cross. 6. The card entitled the Moon, who is Isis, shows drops of rain or dew in the act of being shed by the luminary, and these, as we have seen, are the tears of Isis, which swelled the waters of the Nile and fertilized the fields of Egypt. 7. The 17th card, or star, is the dog star, Sirius, which was consecrated to Isis and symbolized the opening of the year. 8. The game played with the tarot is founded on the sacred number 7, which was of great importance in Egypt. 9. The word tarot is pure Egyptian, in which language tar equals way or road, and ro equals king or royal. It signifies therefore the royal road of life. 10. Alternatively, it is derived from A equals doctrine, Rosh equals Mercury equals Thoth, and the article T, in sum, Tarash, and therefore the tarot is the book of Thoth, or the table of the doctrine of Mercury. Such is the testimony, it being understood that I have set aside several casual statements, for which no kind of justification is produced. These, therefore, are 10 pillars which support the edifice of the thesis, and the same are pillars of sand. The tarot is, of course, allegorical, that is to say, it is symbolism, but allegory and symbol are Catholic of all countries, nations and times. They are not more Egyptian than Mexican, they are of Europe and Cathay, of Tibet beyond the Himalayas and of the London gutters. As allegory and symbol, the cards correspond to many types of ideas and things, they are universal and not particular, and the fact that they do not especially and peculiarly respond to Egyptian doctrine, religious, philosophical or civil, is clear from the failure of Court de Gebelin to go further than the affirmation. The presence of a high priestess among the trumps major is more easily explained as the memorial of some popular superstition, that worship of Diana, for example, the persistence of which in modern Italy has been traced with such striking results by Leland. We have also to remember the universality of horns in every cultus, not excepting that of Tibet. The triple cross is preposterous as an instance of Egyptian symbolism. It is the cross of the patriarchal see, both Greek and Latin, of Venice, of Jerusalem, for example, and it is the form of signing used to this day by the priests and laity of the Orthodox Rite. I pass over the idle allusion to the tears of Isis, because other occult writers have told us that they are Hebrew gods, as regards the 17th card. It is the star Sirius or another, as predisposition pleases. The number 7 was certainly important in Egypt, and any treatise on numerical mysticism will show that the same statement applies everywhere, even if we elect to ignore the 7 Christian sacraments and the gifts of the Divine Spirit. Finally, as regards the etymology of the word tarot, it is sufficient to observe that it was offered before the discovery of the Rosetta Stone and when there was no knowledge of the Egyptian language. The thesis of Court de Gebelin was not suffered to repose undisturbed in the mind of the age, appealing to the learned exclusively by means of a quarto volume. It created the opportunity of tarot cards in Paris, as the center of France and all things French in the universe. The suggestion that divination by cards had behind it the unexpected warrants of ancient hidden science, and that the root of the whole subject was in the wonder and mystery of Egypt, reflected thereon almost a divine dignity. Out of the produce of occult practices cartomancy emerged into fashion and assumed for the moment almost pontifical vestures. The first to undertake the role of battler, magician and juggler, was the illiterate but zealous adventurer, Aliette. The second, as a kind of high priestess, full of intuitions and revelations, was Mlle Lenormand, but she belongs to a later period. While lastly came Julia Orsini, who is referable to a Queen of Cups rather in the tatters of clairvoyance. I am not concerned with these people as tellers of fortune, when destiny itself was shuffling and cutting cards for the game of universal revolution, or for such courts and courtiers as were those of Louis XVIII, Charles IX and Louis Philippe. But under the occult designation of Attila, the transliteration of his name, Aliette, that perruquier took himself with high seriousness and posed rather as a priest of the occult sciences than as an ordinary adept in l'art de tirer les cartes. Even at this day there are people, like Dr. Papoose, who have sought to save some part of his bizarre system from oblivion. The long and heterogeneous story of Le Monde Primitif had come to the end of its telling in 1782, and in 1783 the tracts of Attila had begun pouring from the press, testifying that already he had spent 30, nay, almost 40 years in the study of Egyptian magic, and that he had found the final keys. They were, in fact, the keys of the tarot, which was a book of philosophy and the book of Thoth, but at the same time it was actually written by 17 magi in a temple of fire, on the borders of the Levant, some 3 leagues from Memphis. It contained the science of the universe, and the cartomancist proceeded to apply it to astrology, alchemy, and fortune-telling, without the slightest diffidence or reserve as to the fact that he was driving a trade. I have really little doubt that he considered it genuine as a métier, and that he himself was the first person whom he convinced concerning his system. But the point which we have to notice is that in this manner was the antiquity of the tarot generally trumpeted forth. The little books of Attila are proof positive that he did not know even his own language. When in the course of time he produced a reformed tarot, even those who think of him tenderly admit that he spoiled its symbolism, and in respect of antiquities he had only Court de Gebelin as his universal authority. The cartomancists succeeded one another in the manner which I have mentioned, and of course there were rival adepts of these less than least mysteries, but the scholarship of the subject, if it can be said to have come into existence, reposed after all in the quarto of Court de Gebelin for something more than 60 years. On his authority, there is very little doubt that everyone who became acquainted, by theory or practice, by casual or special concern, with the question of tarot cards, accepted their Egyptian character. It is said that people are taken commonly at their own valuation, and following as it does the line of least resistance, the unsolicitous general mind assuredly accepts archaeological pretensions in the sense of their own daring and of those who put them forward. The first who appeared to reconsider the subject with some presumptive titles to a hearing was the French writer Duchesne, but I am compelled to pass him over with a mere reference, and so also some interesting researches on the general subject of playing cards by Singer in England. The latter believed that the old Venetian game called trappola was the earliest European form of card playing, that it was of Arabian origin, and that the 52 cards used for the purpose derived from that region. I do not gather that any importance was ever attached to this view. Duchesne and Singer were followed by another English writer, W. Chatto, who reviewed the available facts and the cloud of speculations which had already arisen on the subject. This was in 1848, and his work has still a kind of standard authority. But after every allowance for a certain righteousness attributable to the independent mind, it remains an indifferent and even a poor performance. It was, however, characteristic in its way of the approaching middle night of the 19th century. Chatto rejected the Egyptian hypothesis, but as he was at very little pains concerning it, he would scarcely be held to displace Court de Gebelin if the latter had any firm ground beneath his hypothesis. In 1854 another French writer, Boileau, took up the general question, maintaining the Oriental origin of tarot cards, though without attempting to prove it. I am not certain, but I think that he is the first writer who definitely identified them with the gypsies. For him, however, the original gypsy home was in India, and Egypt did not therefore enter into his calculation. In 1860 there arose Eliphas Levi, a brilliant and profound illumin whom it is impossible to accept, and with whom it is even more impossible to dispense. There was never a mouth declaring such great things, of all the Western voices which have proclaimed or interpreted the science called occult and the doctrine called magical. I suppose that, fundamentally speaking, he cared as much and as little as I do for the phenomenal part, but he explained the phenomena with the assurance of one who openly regarded charlatanry as a great means to an end, if used in a right cause. He came unto his own, and his own received him, also at his proper valuation, as a man of great learning which he never was, and as a revealer of all mysteries without having been received into any. I do not think that there was ever an instance of a writer with greater gifts, after their particular kind, who put them to such indifferent uses. After all, he was only Attila a second time in the flesh, endowed in his transmutation with a mouth of gold and a wider casual knowledge. This notwithstanding, he has written the most comprehensive, brilliant, enchanting history of magic which has ever been drawn into writing in any language. The tarot and the de Gebelin hypothesis he took into his heart of hearts, and all occult France and all esoteric Britain, Martinists, half-instructed Kabbalists, schools of soi-disant theosophy there, here and everywhere have accepted his judgment about it with the same confidence as his interpretations of those great classics of Kabbalism which he had skimmed rather than read. The tarot for him was not only the most perfect instrument of divination and the keystone of occult science, but it was the primitive book, the sole book of the ancient magi, the miraculous volume which inspired all the sacred writings of antiquity. In his first work Levi was content, however, with accepting the construction of Court de Gebelin and reproducing the seventh trump major with a few Egyptian characteristics. The question of tarot transmission through the gypsies did not occupy him. Till J. A. Valiant, a bizarre writer with great knowledge of the Romany people, suggested it in his work on those wandering tribes. The two authors were almost coincident and reflected one another thereafter. It remained for Romain Merlin, in 1869, to point out what should have been obvious, namely, that cards of some kind were known in Europe prior to the arrival of the gypsies in or about 1417. But as this was their arrival at Lüneburg, and as their presence can be traced antecedently, the correction loses a considerable part of its force. It is safer, therefore, to say that the evidence for the use of the tarot by Romani tribes was not suggested till after the year 1840. The fact that some gypsies before this period were found using cards is quite explicable on the hypothesis not that they brought them into Europe but found them there already and added them to their stock in trade. We have now seen that there is no particle of evidence for the Egyptian origin of tarot cards. Looking in other directions, it was once advanced on native authority that cards of some kind were invented in China about the year d. 1120. Court de Gebelin believed in his zeal that he had traced them to a Chinese inscription of great imputed antiquity which was said to refer to the subsidence of the waters of the deluge. The characters of this inscription were contained in 77 compartments, and this constitutes the analogy. India had also its tablets, whether cards or otherwise, and these have suggested similar slender similitudes. But the existence, for example, of 10 suits or styles, of 12 numbers each, and representing the avatars of Vishnu, as a fish, tortoise, boar, lion, monkey, hatchet, umbrella, or bow, as a goat, a bud, and as a horse in fine, are not going to help us towards the origin of our own trumps major. Nor do crowns and harps nor even the presence of possible coins as a synonym of deniers and perhaps as an equivalent of pentacles do much to elucidate the lesser arcana. If every tongue and people and clime and period possessed their cards, if with these also they philosophized, divined and gambled, the fact would be interesting enough, but unless they were tarot cards, they would illustrate only the universal tendency of man to be pursuing the same things in more or less the same way. I end, therefore, the history of this subject by repeating that it has no history prior to the 14th century, when the first rumors were heard concerning cards. They may have existed for centuries. But this period would be early enough, if they were only intended for people to try their luck at gambling or their luck at seeing the future. On the other hand, if they contain the deep intimations of secret doctrine, then the 14th century is again early enough, or at least in this respect we are getting as much as we can. Thus concludes Part 1 of the Illustrated Key to the Tarot. Feel free to watch Part 2, The Doctrine Behind the Veil, or one of the many other selections at Weird Audiobooks.